The patch cycle of online games is something that's considered normal by now. The ever-flowing river of new top tiers and new low tiers is something that we have come to expect. Maybe you pick up a character you like, only to have them taken into a back alley and shot right in front of you by Mr. Notes. Only for them to come back in a few months and reveal that it was just a prank, bro. They were alive the whole time. But what about in a game like Super Smash Bros. Melee that has no patches? How can a game like that have a character die, let alone come back to life? Surprisingly, Melee's actually gone through quite a few quote-unquote metas. Luckily for us, these have been fairly well documented through the ever-changing tier lists. For example, in the first years of Melee's history, people thought Sheik was the best character in the game. This was due to her easy-to-understand combos. Things just kind of work with her, like a perfect partner, especially when compared to the theoretical I can fix him power that Fox had, that players at the time just really couldn't utilize, which about sums up how the meta evolves in a game like Melee. It's all based on player skill and discovery. After 5 years of the game's release, Fox would take that top spot on the tier list, as the meta began to revolve more and more around him. If your character can't deal with Fox, you're just not going to make it out here, because he's certainly not going to get worse. There's also instances of characters rising through the ranks drastically once a player gets a hold of them and proves their worth. A prominent example of this being a player like Axe and his Pikachu, who in 2019 began to show people what that yellow mouse could do, and by 2013 had solidified himself in the top of Melee, and single-handedly moved Pikachu up the tier list. This happened again with Armsa and Yoshi 13 years into the game's lifespan. I'm sure his rise could partially be attributed to the rise of techniques like shield dropping becoming more wildly used, which is a technique that greatly assists Yoshi due to him being unable to act out of shield after he returns to egg. Other techniques also affect characters' place in the meta. Things like power shielding and crouch cancelling, a method to reduce the hit stun you suffer from a hit, have revolutionized characters and made some suffer more than others. For example, as power shields become more popular, matchups like Falco and Marth become a bit more of a struggle for Falco than it used to be. I mean, bro brought a sword to a gunfight and is being rewarded. This affects his matchups and position within the meta. Characters like Falcon seem to have greatly benefited from players getting more used to crouch cancelling, with some of the best players to implement the technique being players of that character. Characters can also fall out of the meta via a lack of representation, the exact opposite of Pikachu and Yoshi. Samus used to be a well-represented character in the top 20 of Melee for a mid-tier, but nowadays you'll have to go fairly down the top 100 to find a Samus player. This causes the character to look unfavourable in the eyes of the public, meaning less players pick her up, meaning new strategy is developed slower. This has caused her to be considered worse and worse. Nowadays, it feels like people consider her more in line with Luigi than they do Pikachu and Yoshi.
Some people think Samus is super overrated and was like carried by some good players.
Personally, I think she's maybe not. No, she is a great character. I mean, maybe even the best to ever do it. So cases like Axe and Armsa are really as special as they seem. These almost opinion-focused metas are ever-changing as players get a hold of new characters and unlock never-before-seen potential in this just over 20-year-old game, which is just kind of a marvel in and of itself. However, there is one character who has received a giant nerf. Not only once, but twice at the hands of the people who play the game themselves. And yet, somehow, at the end of it all, has come out alive and well. I'm of course talking about the Ice Climbers. Ice Climbers are a very, very odd case in this game. I'm sure if you consume Melee content even casually, you're aware of wobbling. At Infinite, unique to the Ice Climbers, and that they can hold you in a grab for as long as they want, by timing pummels with jabs to keep the opponent from mashing out. This technique has been controversial to say the least among the community, for as long as it has existed.
Hey, you're shit! You're fucking shit! You're fucking shit! Oh my god!
But did you know it was actually banned at the beginning of Melee's lifespan? In the early days of Melee, wobbling was decided to be made illegal at certain tournaments, depending on who was running it. This meant that if you were to wobble an opponent, you would just be disqualified from the event. However, even with this ban, a player by the name of Chudat still remained as one of the best players in the world, hanging with all of the old top dogs you know from the documentary. However, things changed in 2013, when Melee won its right to be a main game at EVO 2013. Since the organisers of EVO weren't insanely familiar with Melee, they may not have known its community rule set inside and out, or they may have just thought that it was fine in their eyes. I mean, fighting games have infinites. But for EVO 2013, wobbling would be legal, to which we would see the repercussions almost immediately. Wobbles would go to get second at EVO, which I don't think anyone at the time would have predicted with a tournament with all 5 gods in attendance. The repercussions didn't stop there though, because EVO was the top dog of fighting game tournaments. If they were going to allow wobbling to be legal, then the rest of the community followed suit like little sheep, and wobbling would be made legal across the entire world. And we would see an era of 6 years where wobbling was in full force. Players like Nintendo, Army, Chudat, and Bananas all staked their claims at some point by upsetting some of the best players in the world, all with the help of a button. And to say it was controversial would be understating it. Players who won using ice climbers would often be ridiculed for their use of such an easy punish technique, allowing them to cut out a part of the game that every other character has to grind to get good at.
Your shit!
Being called fraudulent that they weren't actually that good, but just got lucky. And this isn't something people said with no basis whatsoever. Whether it was confirmation bias or not, people noticed top players were very often upset by Ice Climber players. All you had to do was be playing just a little bit off, and the devilish duo would be there to eat you up. Then you would very rarely hear from that same Ices player again after that win. Some stand out in that regard, where players like Chudat, who managed to stay in the top 20 for a good period of time, and heroes like Bananas, who showed their consistency, at least before the second coming. You see, once Melee was dropped from EVO, then the community began to bring up the discussion again. Should we ban wobbling? In the end, it seemed like the community was mainly for it, using things like the health of viewership, not getting bored having to watch a player get wobbled for a whole set, or watching Ices get camped out because of the fear of the wobble. And that would improve the health of the game and viewership, supposedly. So on February 8th, 2019, wobbling would be banned in Tennessee, and this would snowball throughout the whole community this time. It was community-wide, and the exodus was fierce. Ice Climber mains either dropped the character or would need to essentially learn a whole new part of their game, which wouldn't be impossible, but was certainly discouraging. When they'd already gotten to a certain level, only to have their main tool taken away from them. This caused a lot of Ice Climber players to just quit the game altogether, at least for a certain amount of time. Suddenly it felt like Ice Climbers as a character had just dropped off the map entirely. One of the game's already small cast of viable characters potentially gone for good. That was until Rollback Rumble SCL qualifier in October of 2020, God's a mouthful, where we would truly see the Ice Climbers weren't done yet. A player by the name of Slug would run his way through the bracket, taking wins over Lucky, Sunsei, Moki, and Shroomed. But how was he doing it? I thought the Ice Climbers were just garbage now. Well, turns out Ices were more than just wobbling. They still have their great ground movement and insanely powerful smash attacks and KO potential. But not only that, Slug had been able to fully utilize a technique known as handoffs to really bring back the Ice Climber's punish potential. Handoffs are a technique that utilize the other climber being active during a grab to play a fun game of catch with each other, and pseudo-infinitely juggle the opposing character. But isn't this just another infinite? Won't this get banned as well? No, you see, handoffs are different to wobbling in a few key ways. 1. They're heavier on the execution side, so players can actually mess them up, which would very rarely happen with wobbling. And 2, you can't do it just anywhere. See, not only do handoffs move you forward, meaning that if you get a grab right near the edge of the stage, you'll be limited to a certain number of grabs before you get to the edge, but they also can only be done from certain points on the stage. As if you're too close to the center, then your second Ice Climber CPU will randomly decide where to throw the opponent, as opposed to the outer of the stage where they will always throw off stage, allowing for that juggle. So using this technique, Slug would pave the way for Ice Climbers to come. And during 2022, he would really show what they could do.
Oh my God, that's a back air. Slug upsetting Golden Guardian Zane.
Wins over some of the best players in the world would solidify Ice Climber's place in the meta, and faith in the character seemed to be restoring. Chudat has made a resurgence, and you'll spot him in some brackets every now and again. I mean, it's crazy that this guy is still playing such a high level. And unfortunately for our top Sheik mains, some new Ices are coming out of the woodworks. Just the other week, we saw J-Mook get upset by Moth, and over in Europe, we saw the previous Fox main Nikki also exclusively use the Ice Climbers to get wins over top EU players like Frenzy and Prof, and take it damn close against Triff in a notoriously hard matchup which we saw Armada dominate for years. The community perception of Ice Climbers also seems to have gotten a lot better. Slug has now generally become a crowd favourite player, and Ice Climbers players aren't ridiculed for doing handoffs, but enamoured people who love the flashiness of the handoff combos. So suffice to say, there's hope for the Devilish duo yet. And I would say that they are well and truly a character that died and has now, due to players persevering with a character that they believe in, been well and truly revived.